Minuscule. It is a very small game, as the name says. It's a small box, a tin box, very nice looking, with little bugs on the cover. And the game is, in fact, a game about bugs. It is technically a race game where bugs are trying to sit as close as possible to this card here, to this space here. Thematically, they are trying to reach positions with nice food, the sugar being the most desirable, and the little pebble being the least desirable, very hard to digest. It is a card and board game, meaning there are only cards and tokens in this game, so from the point of view of components, it looks like it's only cards, but these cards that you see here form a track, which for all intents and purposes is a board, because it never changes, it remains the same from game to game. So at the beginning of the game, you form this track with these cards that have numbers and symbols of food, and you put them in order from 1 to 7. Then you also have these markers here representing very nice looking stand-ups of little insects. The art is pretty cute. My daughters really like it. And you place them on this track in an order that changes from game to game. There's a procedure to do that. We do not need to get into too much detail. Now, what is interesting, there are two decks of cards here. This deck here, the back of the cards is the same for all cards, and is nice because it can be used as a player aid. The other side simply represents insects, one insect per card. You shuffle these cards at the beginning of the game, and you then assign 2 randomly to each player. 3 if you're playing a 2-player game. And these cards are looked at by the owning player and then kept there secretly. They are a secret for the rest of the game. Something similar to what you have in the Hare and Tortoise by Aiello, in which you also have a race game, and cards that are given to player at the beginning of the game pretty much represents the animals on which the players are betting, so to speak. And when you're playing with children, the hardest part of the entire game is simply not to reveal the cards. Children will want to tell you because they like to share knowledge. They want to show you how cute their art is, and of course that messes up the game a little bit. Or you just pretend that you have forgotten what you saw, which I do quite often. So you assign these cards to your players at the beginning of the game, and then you place the insects on the board, and then you will assign these other cards. You shuffle these other cards together, and you give a hand of cards to the players. The number of cards depends on the number of players that you have. And then game is super simple. When it is your turn, simply look at the cards that you have in your hand. You play one on the table, you resolve the effect, and it is discarded. Next player plays a card, resolves the effect, and you go around the table like this until all players have played all of their cards. There is no escape from that. You have to play all of your cards, whether you want it or not, whether the card is beneficial to you or not. You're only basically choosing the order in which you'll get rid of your cards from your hand. When you play cards, insects on the track move. When you play a card such as this one, with the symbol of the food, with the symbol of one of the foods on the board, you will simply move the insect on the corresponding card, whichever the insect is, by the number of spaces indicated by the number in the direction indicated there. For example, if you play this card, the insect which is on the olive space, that would be this one, moves by 3 spaces ahead towards the top of the track. 1, 2, 3. And then all the other insects slide back to fill the space that was left open. If I play this card, then the insect which is on the sugar space moves back by 3 spaces. 1, 2, 3. And the other ones move up. So insects just move around like that. You may have cards that give you more options. For example, this card can be used for this space or this space. And also, you may choose whether to use it for a +1 movement or -1 movement. You also have cards that are not related to the space, but to the insect itself. When you play this card, it is the bee that moves wherever the bee is at that point by 1 in either direction. This is the same for the fly. And suppose I want the fly, to move back because I want to help somebody else instead. So this is simply how it works. You have actually 2 more cards that are a little different. One, this card here, but instead whichever animal is on the cherry, when you play this card, moves back to the pebble. And this is a card that allows you to replace one of the cards that you receive at the beginning with a new card from this draw deck. You draw it randomly, but at least if you're really stuck with cards that you don't want there, you get a chance of getting better ones. You play the game until all players have played all of their cards, and at that point you simply look at the situation on the board, you reveal the insects that you have. Suppose I have these 3 because it's a 2-player game, and then simply looking at the player aid, you determine how many points you scored. At this point, the insect which is on the first space generates 10 points, the one on the second 8 points, and so on and so forth. I have the bee on the olive, which scores me 3 points. Man, I have this insect here at the bottom. Oh, that's terrible. It scores me 1 point. I am at 4. And then the caterpillar. Well, the caterpillar is in a great position, actually. It gives me 10 points, so I have 14 points. Which is an okay score. It's not that great of a score. Usually my daughter Amelia, who's 5, scores much better than that. And that is interesting, actually. When we were playing the game, she started playing this game as most race games, which is she wanted her insects to go first, to win, to be on the first position at the end. And the first time that we played the game, it just so happens that my insect was actually there. And she thought she had lost the game. She was a little disappointed. Then we started counting points and she realized that I had lost horribly because I had an insect here and then I had my other insect here and I had the insect here. I had a terrible score where she was consistently in this area here and she had won by a huge margin. And that was a bit of a surprise for her, but I think it was an interesting experience because she saw that, well, there are games in which you may win in a more nuanced way than just by getting there first. So, definitely a small game and definitely a game for children. I guess as a light game it could be played by adults too, but it has to be, again, adults that really want a light entertainment. There's also a variant to add a little bit of complexity, but very little. And frankly, I much prefer the game just as a simple, straightforward game. That my daughter, who is 5, perfectly understands it. She doesn't just understand the mechanics. Those are so simple that even if you're not 5 yet, you can really understand them. There is no reading involved as long as you can tell numbers and the plus and the minus symbols, and kids these days learn those things pretty early. Such as for just playing the games in terms of implementing the strategy, playing a card and doing what the card tells you to do. Even my daughter Louisa, who is 3, can play it, and she enjoys it because everything in the game looks so cute and nice, and it's fun to move these tokens around. It's nice that they had these vertical tokens. It's no small thing. Kids have a hard time picking up small components like token. Vertical stuff is very easy for them. They really enjoy playing with components that have been designed in a way that small kids can easily manipulate them. So the mechanics are super simple. Even very small children can understand it, can perform the mechanics. It will be, in the case if you're playing with a child as young as my daughter Louisa, who is 3, more of a, I don't know, structured play set more than a game itself. But when it comes to slightly older kids, for example, my daughter Amelia, kids of that age can actually understand the game, not just the procedures, but the strategy behind it. There's a little bit of programming. I mean, it took us a game or 2, but she realized that the order in which you play the cards is very important. That if you have a certain card with a certain location and your favorite insect is not there, it's a good idea to first bring the insect there, then you play the card with the location. She actually took less time than I thought to understand the idea of relative movement, which is if I cannot move my guy ahead, maybe I can move somebody else behind my guy, and that will simply bump up the insect that I want to reach the top of the track. So actually, it's a perfectly manageable game for even young children, and actually my daughter really enjoyed it. Of the games that we played in the last couple of weeks, this has become one that she has often asked me to play, and she really enjoys it. There is a luck component, yes, definitely. This is not a game that you should obsess about in terms of strategy, because you will never be able to control everything that you do. If you go over 2 players, then actually I feel it'll probably just feel very random. You will be riding in a storm. You'll be trying to influence a vast system of changing elements with very little possibilities. I haven't played with 6 players. The game says that it could go up to that number of players, but with 6 players, I guess that when it goes back, well, first there will be a little bit of downtime, certainly, because there isn't much that you can do during other players' turns. You're looking at the evolving situation, but if there are still 4 players ahead of you, so much is still going to evolve. And that's kind of the problem, I think. When you have more players, by the time the game goes back to you, probably the board will look like nothing like what you had before, and I don't know how easy or even possible it's going to be to plan ahead to any degree. So I played it with 2 players and with 3 players. I enjoyed it that way. I don't think I want to try it with more players than that. With 2 players and 3 players, you have randomness, yes, and an already considerable amount of that, given the cards that you get and what other players do. But it felt manageable. It felt that the decisions of the players were still significant. You could do a little bit of planning ahead, programming. There was interaction, but definitely in a fun way. So, a game for kids that actually looks good, plays pretty fast, it's easy to understand, and frankly it has a nice, a couple of interesting ideas. The idea of planning ahead, of teaching kids the basics of plan a couple of moves ahead, choose the order of the cards. The cards will perform different things and work differently if you do a little bit of planning and play the cards in a certain order. These are all interesting concepts that's good to get kids exposed to, and even better if they have fun doing so. And this is definitely a game that my daughter Amelia enjoyed. Even my daughter Louise enjoyed it for reasons related to the components, more to the gameplay, because she does not get gameplay yet. But definitely enjoyable game. For adults, I don't know that adults will find much into this game. Maybe it's a really form of light entertainment. If you take it too seriously with the degree of randoms that you have, this game is going to drive you crazy. I don't know, maybe give it a try as a light filler, but definitely I would see this much more as a family game, as a game that adults can play with kids. And it's not a game like Candyland that adults will be in pain as they're playing it with kids, or I should say for the kids. When you're playing this game with your children, it may not be the biggest blast of your game night or your game experience, but if you're playing with your children, it is entertaining. It is definitely entertaining. And as a family game, I'm happy that I have it so they can play with my daughter Amelia especially, who is really enjoying Minuscule.